This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmitting from the red sanctums of the Mechanicus, across the noosphere and into the hearts of the faithful. In this broadcast, we enter the labyrinth life of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl, a mind that has walked for 10,000 years, a maker of miracles and heresies alike. From the forges of Mars, to the grave of Cadia, to the resurrection vaults of Macragge, his work has shaped the fate of the Imperium itself. This is not merely the chronicle of a man, but the record of a great work spanning millennia, of secrets jealously guarded, of technologies that defy dogma, and of a will that bends even Primarchs to its purpose. Attention, loyal citizens of the Imperium and adepts of the Machine God. You are ordered to subscribe to this channel's frequency. Activate the notification rune so that no further data transmissions are lost to the void. Failure to comply is to consign yourself to ignorance, the most dangerous heresy of all. Ready your processors, shield your mind from scrap code, and mark these words well. This is the voice of Dominissimo, and this is the law of Belisarius Cawl. The first breath of Belisarius Cawl was not taken in a cradle, but exhaled through the recirculators of a Martian birthing vat. In the gene crypts of Xanthi Terra, where the cult Mechanicus grows its children as efficiently as it casts adamantine, he came into the red world already more than a child. His flesh was quick grown to the proportions of a young adolescent. His mind had been force inloaded with catechisms and code before his eyes had ever seen the sun. He was a product of process, yet singular from the first moment. The facility belonged to Magos biologist Hammereth. These vaults had turned out generations of dutiful adepts for its forges. But the boy that shambled from the amniotic sluices confounded expectation. By the time he reached the end of the miles-long egress queue, mere hours after decanting, he knew his designation, could converse in multiple dialects of Binaric, and recite the core tenets of the cult Mechanicus with the calm certainty of a catechist. To the robed attendants, he must have seemed less like a newborn than a freshly awakened cogitator, already set to task. Mars itself was the next tutor. The forge's heat haze and the ozone bite of plasma bleed into the culture of every acolyte. But Cawl absorbed more than ritual. The doctrine for the quest of knowledge, to seek the Omnissiah through understanding, took root in him as a conviction rather than compliance. He learned the formal veneration of the Machine God, the careful litany to soothe the spirit within a tool, and the strictures that define what might be studied and how. He also learned, quietly, where the boundaries lay, so that he could test them. As was custom, the newly minted Tech Acolytum was cycled through disciplinaries: metallurgy and material sanctification, logic engine and memory palaces, cybernetics and bionics, gene law and biochemistry. In every cohort he was marked as hungry, tireless, and unervingly fluent. Cawl did not lock himself to a single track, he chased all of them. An omnivorous student who refused to be sorted by the convenience of a forge's staffing chart. The very scale of the great Martian enterprise, a world that was a factory, made such breadth possible, and he used the world like a library. He also formed his first heresies, not of faith, but of taste. Where senior tech priests sprouted arachnid limb trees and traded faces for mass shrines, the young Cawl clung to the silhouette of humanity. He still took augments, of course, no acolyte rose without steel, but he preferred the internal refinements and concealed interfaces over ostentation. He argued, when he dared, that the Emperor's gift of the human form had efficiencies the grotesque often forgot. It was an unfashionable position in some circles, and it set him apart long before his name meant anything. The appetite for learning made him a wanderer. As soon as a module's curriculum bored him, or as soon as his masters decided he had taken everything they could usefully provide, he moved. Cawl grafted himself onto passing pilgrim caravans and forge convoys, embedding with Factorum crews and shipboard maintenance clades, and insulated his way into the new workshops across multiple forge worlds. The pattern repeated: integrate, absorb, depart. Each apprenticeship widened his purview while deliberately keeping him free of commitments that might narrow it. In those early years, he cultivated a reputation for impossible retention and for a kind of serene impatience. He did not scorn ritual, he saw its function, but he sought the why under the how and the mechanism beneath the mystery. In genetic vaults he lingered longest, drawn to the Magos biologist disciplines where flesh and machine met at the smallest scales. It was there he began the habit of taking sanctioned methodologies apart and reassembling them better, a verb few mentors encouraged and fewer forgave. His restraint in visible augmentations did not reflect restraint in total. In hidden cells under the blind spots of archive sensors, the young adept operated on himself. He opened skull and cortex to add capacity, to hotwire recall, to deepen the channels of association. There were unsanctioned surgeries, dangerous in outcome and career alike, but he judged the risk acceptable. It was an early declaration of method that would define him. When the work demanded a capability, he would manufacture it, even if the manufacturer was himself. By temperament, he was sociable in the Mechanicus fashion, curious, interrogative, fond of disputation that ended in data rather than deference. He collected peers as he moved, fellow acolytes and junior magi who shared or contested his hypotheses, and he remembered them as files to be reopened when a problem echoed an old debate. Martian education rewards the precise question. Cawl had a gift for asking the one that stripped a process to its principle. The rites of maintenance and the litanies of activation were not superstitions to him, however. He treated the machine spirit with a scholar piety, convinced that respect for the emergent personality of a device and comprehension of its function were complementary rather than opposed. That dual approach made him welcome in places purely ritualistic adepts irritated and purely rational heretics alarmed. He could speak to both, and often did. His file in the Martian Scholums would have shown a near unbroken chain of accommodations, had it not already been cluttered with cautionary marginalia. Excessive scope, insufficient patience for repetition once fundamentals are proved, inclination to redesign without mandate. On Mars, such notes can either be a warning or a prophecy. For Cawl, they were both. A list of the friction points that would dog him and the exact qualities that made him invaluable when a process refused to yield. Mars frames its adepts with place as much as pedagogy, and the red planet left its marks on him. The orbital dogs that ring the equator, the dust fogs that carried the tang of ferrochemicals, the Titan legions that shook the plains when they marched from their basilicas. These were not merely backdrops but the ecosystem that trained his intuition. In a civilization where a misplaced cipher could still a continent's production, he grasped early that systems mattered as much as parts. That lesson would shape everything he touched. So the origin of Belisarius Cawl is not a single dramatic event, but a configuration. Vat-born in Xanthi Terra, catechized in Binaric and Mechanicus Creed while still afloat in Neutron Gel. A prodigy whose first steps were down the factory-long egress ways. A student who refused to become narrow-minded, a mechanic of his own mind. Where many adepts conflate their conversation with sanctity, he learned to honour the past by surpassing it, carefully where he could, covertly where he must. The traits that later ages would call genius, hubris, or heresy were present from the beginning, written into the way he learned to be on Mars. Even in those earliest files, one can glimpse the tension that would define his every choice, the cult's demand for preservation and the universe's demand for adaptation. Cawl's answer, formed in the vats and annulled in the forged schools, was simple and relentless. Learn more, change more, become more. Before the crisis and commissions, before legends and grudges, there was only the Red World, the hiss of pneumatics, and a nascent mind deciding that knowledge was not a relic to be dusted, but a machine to be built. After emerging from the vats of Xanthi Terra as a prodigious adolescent, mentally and physically, Belisarius Cawl did not rest in place. Mars and its countless forge worlds became his extended workshop, his sanctum, and his crucible. He evolved rapidly from a gifted acolyte into a mechanical explorer of extraordinary breadth. He would not be defined by a single specialisation. The young tech acolyte refused the comfort of narrow expertise. While most apprentices of the Adeptus Mechanicus were quickly assigned to a single discipline, Cawl did the opposite. He travelled vicariously across sectors, absorbing knowledge wherever he could. Mars, Risa, Antioch, Bellicane, and Vertia 7 were among the worlds he stalked with intent. He embedded himself within engineering expeditions, supply convoys, and forge world caravans bound for distant arms manufactorums. There, he casually claimed apprenticeships with masters of diverse arts, material sanctification, gene engineering, machine spirit litanies, moving always before he became indispensable, but carrying every bit of knowledge forward. On a world such as Trizolonian A4, perched in the Trizolonian system, Cawl's abilities found focus. There, under Magos Domina Hester Aspertia Sigma Sigma, he learned forbidden arts, soul merging, the dark interface that could blend consciousnesses via cybernetic hardware. Cawl's only peer and friend on Trizolonian was another Martian-born adept named Friedrich Adam Silupkovo. The two became inseparable, bonded by mutual fascination and the shared risks of forbidden knowledge. On Trizolonian, amidst the chaos of the Horus Heresy, Cawl refined his uncanny knack for performance. When the Forge World fractured under the traitor legions, Magos Aspertia defected to Horus, and the planet fell into ruin. Cawl and Friedrich turned on their mistress, slaying her in cold calculation. He then used her own soul-merging network to absorb her memory core, integrating her forbidden knowledge of cloning and digital mind transfer into his mental architecture. He emerged, not as a disciple or avenger, but as a thief of secrets, marked by tragedy and by a mind infinitely enriched. Cawl did not collect such research passively, he reconfigured his mind itself to store it. He began crafting subminds, discrete consciousness modules dedicated to specific experiments or disciplines. These were not mindless servitors, but extensions of his own cognitive process, subtle intelligences tracking side projects, freeing him to focus on grand tasks while the details fermented in parallel systems. Such architecture was far beyond typical tech priest designs, unorthodox, unsettling, but uniquely functional. His reputation among Mechanicus peers settled into paradox. They feared him and called him a heretic in whispered halls, yet they respected him, or at least envied him, because no one else could cross disciplines the way he could. From biomancy to artillery design, from proto-AI routing to warp field stabilization, Cawl's intelligence was not just scattered, it was interconnected, cross-indexed, and hyper-productive. Martian records of the era called him a prime conduit of the Omnissiah, a title reserved for only the most polymathic and dangerous of Martian minds. In the forge vaults of Mars, his standing was the sort of anomaly that both intrigued and haunted the conservators of knowledge. But ambition could not be isolated. His method mandated solitude. He had to erase parts of himself, literally dump data, every few centuries to make room for more data in his optic cortex. Memories of early experiments, names, places, slipped into organised oblivion. The cost of brilliance was dark. He was not the same man he began as, even by his own estimation. Within the hallowed tiers of forged domains, young Cawl's presence shaped tools and expectations. He would be found offering detailed diagnostics on machine spirits, then casually bending on a scrap of logic into a miniature Archmagos level invention. He engaged not through ostentation or sermons, but through compelling demonstration, a tempering of wonder in the face of creation, yet tempered with relentless curiosity. In one documented field test, he retrofitted a servo-armed cluster on a Dominus pattern reconnaissance drone mid-battle, using an improvised logic sequence. The arm stabilised the drone, which carried a critical status report from the field back to Terra nearly intact. He did not boast of the act, but his subordinates spoke of it for decades. In the data halls of Versius 7, a technologist once noted, he asks questions that expose the code running worship routines, and then subtly recalibrates the code. Whether such notes were warning or prophecies, Cawl forged on, unflagging. By the end of his apprentice cycle, almost 2 decades later, he had tasted nearly everything Mars, Ryza, Antioch, Bellicane and Versius 7 had to offer. He had left no master untouched, no databank unplundered, no machine spirit unstudied. Yet he remained technically an acolyte, unwilling to ascend until every vein of knowledge had been mined and mapped. This chapter of his life did not herald legends or major galactic events. It was not the resurrection of a Primarch, it was not a forging of a new legion, it was a quieter crucible. Cawl's growth was deliberate and incremental, hidden in the debris of sank forges and in off-grid labs. What emerged was not just a master technician, but a mind poised to redefine the Imperium's future. He was ready, the gears of fate turned, but in those years of wandering and data gleaning, learning every sub-discipline of the machine god, Cawl built himself not as a servant of doctrine, but as his living challenge. A challenger to stagnation, a catalyst in flesh and wire. His apprenticeship was not there to preserve, but to transcend. In the labyrinth corridors of the Imperial Palace, where every marble and mosaic whispers of eternity, Belisarius Cawl's true test began. Not under the assault of heretical enemies, but before the withered eyes of the Emperor's own Lord Geneticist, Ezekiel Sedaine. Sedaine was no ordinary Magos biologist. He was the Lord Geneticist and director of the Emperor's biotechnical division, an architect of the Space Marine gene seed and the perfecter of the Black Carapace implant. His achievements had once shone with near-divine brilliance. Yet, by the end of the Horus Heresy, immortality itself was slipping from his grasp. His body, a frail husk, betrayed the weight of centuries, and rejuvenant treatments, the gift of longevity, failed to stall his decay no longer. Haunted by the approach of death and desperate to continue the Emperor's work, Sedaine set his eyes on a solution both brilliant and heretical: mind-merging technology. He had heard of a tech priest, Cawl, who had mastered the secret arts of soul merging and cloning. Sedaine, driven by dying arrogance, believed that if he fused his mind with Cawl's, his consciousness would overpower the younger mind, granting him a form of unending life. Cunningly, Sedaine summoned Cawl to Terra under the guise of necessity, detailing a dire ruse. Cawl's friend Friedrich Quovo lay mortally wounded, and only the mind merging could save him. Sedaine ordered his servant, Altrix Hermina, to shoot Friedrich in cold blood, using his friend's injury as blackmail. Fear and guilt squeezed Cawl's resolve. Friedrich's life hung in the balance, and Sedaine's promised salvation so long as Cawl agreed to the cerebral merger. With a soul burdened by his friend's blood sliding into stasis, Cawl contested. The procedure commenced. A cortical splice, a melding of matter and memory, yet Sedaine underestimated the core of the man he sought to subdue. When Cawl emerged, the stronger intellect won. It was not Sedaine who dominated, but Cawl's mind. Now burdened with the dual volumes of experience, his own and Sedaine's, the elder Magos' personality was buried, hidden beneath the unrelenting ascent of Cawl's will. In those fused memories lay something more than knowledge, a vision. Cawl felt himself step into a remembered picture that predated the merger. a younger Sedaine meeting the Emperor during the Unification Wars. In that dream-wrought moment, the Master of Mankind addressed Belisarius Cawl, not Sedaine, speaking across time, warning him of a path that might one day feel like betrayal. But in spite of that feeling, or perhaps because of it, he must continue the work the Emperor began. It was not a message for Sedaine, but for Cawl, waiting centuries for him. Thus, remorseless and irrevocably altered, Belisarius Cawl exited the Imperial Palace with more than just technology. He carried a mandate and a composite mind. One part came from Sedaine's brilliance for genetic perfection, another from Cawl's insatiable drive. He would never let Sedaine's voice resurface, yet it remained stored in the depths, like a fossil compressed within ancient rock, influencing decisions and offering counsel, if only indirectly. This chapter of his life, this subtle surgical portrayal, changed everything. It gave him unparalleled insight into the gene law and human enhancement, supercharging his capacity for creation. But more than that, it established precedent. Cawl could subsume, conceal and command more than machines. He had become the machine, a mind forged of multiple voices, unified in purpose. Beyond learning, the merger shaped Cawl's persona. He became the living embodiment of contradictory heresy and devotion, a man with two soul cores walking the path his Emperor prescribed, even if it felt unthinkable. The idea of betrayal, deeply implanted, scarred him, yet he carried on, not in spite of prophecy, but because of it. In the silent halls where the Emperor once walked, Cawl gained more than forbidden technique. He gained a destiny. He left Terra not as a student or a servant, but as something altogether new, united, unbroken, and charged with the future of humanity's salvation. In the cold bowels of Mars, beneath layers of red dust and steel, one man persevered where centuries flowed like seconds. Belisarius Cawl became far more than a tech priest. He became an institution, a mind stretched across 10 millennia. But the path from mortal adept to ageless architect was paved with memory loss, mind sharing, and a will that defied time itself. When mortal tech priests reached beyond 3 centuries, their word among Mars is that they'd tap into machinery and augmentation to cheat death. But Cawl did not merely cling to life, he extended it in impossible spans. Theory suggests he may have replaced vast swathes of his organic physiology with mechanical analogues. Some speculate he now exists almost entirely as a construct, his flesh preserved only for symbolic continuity. But longevity alone did not define him. What marked Cawl was the mind beneath those cybernetic layers and how he sustained it. Even Archmagos minds faced limitations. Every 500 years or so, Cawl was forced to purge his memory, offloading vast data caches into external storage devices to avoid cerebral overload. Imagine intentionally erasing decades of your own life, not under compulsion, but by architectural necessity. The result? A mind that retains brilliance but remains haunted by gaps, experiments he vaguely remembers conducting, breakthroughs he can't place, names that hang like shadows he cannot fully grasp. Each purge saved his cognition, but cost parts of him. The question becomes, what if you can't remember, but you have records? Cawl's solution was extraordinary. Through mechanisms he pioneered, soul merging, he absorbed other consciousnesses into himself. These sub-minds were not lost personalities, but each a conscience with their own memories and strengths. Over time, Cawl's mind evolved from a single identity into a mesh, a gestalt mind woven from multiple wills. At least 2 of these sub-minds were notable: Magos Aspertia, whose mind he absorbed on Trisolian, and Lord Geneticist Sedaine from Terra. However, the original personalities faded, subsumed by Cawl's core will, so that now, even he isn't certain where he ends and they begin. This amalgamation wasn't madness, it was purpose. Cawl spun off sub-Cawls, discrete minds designed to run experiments, pilot research vaults, and manage projects while his primary consciousness focused elsewhere. Each submind could argue, disagree, or act independently, creating a cognitive hive capable of simultaneous genius. It was his answer to time, memory, and human limitation. In some ways, he fractured his mind to build a network, a neural empire within himself, while preserving the critical core that retained him. When even Cawl's composite mind faltered, he resorted to status. Locked away in crypts, he would sleep for decades while his body repaired itself and his mind recalibrated. When he awoke, wary decades behind him, his intellect was rebooted, recharged, recalibrated, and dangerous. It is said he emerged from those slumbers more relentless, a machine-augmented mind sharpened by sleep, memory, and secret ambition. All those lost memories and purged data went somewhere. Cawl's archives are described as vaults the size of battle cruisers, overflowing with knowledge. Within his bins of code slates lie entire genetic libraries, STC fragments, Xenos languages, catalogues of worlds, lost warfare technology, and designs rescinded by time. He archives what he cannot hold and forgets what he cannot stash. Today, none can match the scope of his repository. nor the dangerous brilliance that survives in his cells, brushes and bionic tendrils. For all his secrets, Cawl remains a figure both revered and feared. Among the radical Mechanicus, many idolise his originality. Among traditionalists, he is a heretic waiting to unfold. Yet many Forge Worlds still willingly contribute troops and data at his command, hoping for a share of his discoveries. Cawl remains a paradox, a mind fractured yet unified, forgotten yet remembered, ancient and machine-born, a living conduit across time. He is less a man and more an evolving mind planet, spinning data, regenerating ideas and surviving time. And in that quiet, relentless persistence lies the engine behind all his future deeds. When Abaddon the Despoiler unleashed the 13th Black Crusade upon Cadia, few could have foreseen that an ancient mechanism of hope would be at the heart of both the world's salvation and its destruction. For Belisarius Cawl, this was not merely a battle, it was the moment when millennia of hidden knowledge collided with calamity. Cadia's Blackstone pylons, massive edifices carved from the alien Noctilith, had stood silent guard over the Cadian Gate for countless ages. Reaching 500 metres above ground and plunging 250 metres below, their purpose was obscure to most. But Cawl knew their true nature, anti-Imperium anchors holding back the Eye of Terror itself. As the 13th Black Crusade began in 999.M41, Cadia teetered under the weight of demonic siege. The sky roared with warp storms and the payloads flickered. It was then that Cawl arrived, guided by a Harlequin Shadowseer to merge his method with ancient Xenos engineering. Understanding at last, he began to work. In the underground network of pylons, Cawl laboured under mounting pressure. He was not alone. From the Tesseract of Time stepped Trazen the Infinite, the Necron overlord known for collecting relics and lives across eons. For reasons only he could fathom, Trazen chose to aid Cawl. With uneasy cooperation and unspoken intrigue, they deciphered the pylons' mechanisms and unlocked their potential. As Lord Castellanor Circa Creed demanded time, Cawl granted hope. Activation was imminent. The pylons roared to life with midnight blue resonance, warp energy recoiling, demonic tides receding. For a fleeting moment, Cadia stood triumphant. The Eye of Terror quivered, chaos retreated. History nearly tilted towards hope. Yet Abaddon would not be denied. Above, the Blackstone fortress, the Will of Eternity, plummeted from orbit, a weapon-turned asteroid. Its impact shattered the pylon field, pulverising the ground, scrambling warp suppression, and causing tectonic destruction across continents. Cadia, the Imperium's linchpin, began to break apart. As worlds collapsed and warp spilled through the rent, evacuation became all that mattered. Cawl took command aboard his flagship, the Iron Revenant. The Celestian Crusade, a ragtag column led by Saint Celestine, Inquisitor Greyfax, Creed, Scutari, and Faithful Souls, fled towards salvation. Cawl's vessel held two priceless artifacts, the Armour of Fate, built to preserve Guilliman, and the Emperor's Sword, a weapon of spiritual potency. Cawl watched the ship systems overload as Abaddon's legions closed in. In final defiance, the Revenant sacrificed itself, delaying the enemy and ensuring the Crusade reached the webway, their only way to escape the collapse. As Cadia collapsed beneath them, the pylons lay in ruin. Ancient monoliths, embodiments of hope, were reduced to rubble. The Eye of Terror surged unchecked, tearing the galaxy in two. Yet in the last blaze of engineering, Cawl revealed what the pylons were meant to do, and that they could still work. Though Cadia was lost, the knowledge of the pylon technology remained. Cawl carried it forward, not as failure, but as proof. The flash of suppressed warp energy proved that the Imperium might yet be saved by understanding rather than fortitude. Cadia's demise birthed the Great Rift, a rent in reality that cleaved the Imperium in half. But the survivors, the Celestine Crusade, found sanctuary with the Inari Eldar and travelled through the webway to worlds beyond. There, Guilliman's resurrection awaited. Without the pylon's brief victory and Cawl's secrets, even that spark of hope might have been extinguished. Cadia's fall was not just a loss, it was a lesson. Cawl emerged from the ruins with something more than knowledge. He had a mandate to reconstruct, reactivate and reseal. The pylon's secrets had revealed the path. He would walk it, armed with Xenos insight and Imperium resolve. Cawl's genius became visible not in triumph, but in escape. It lay not in victory, but in vision. The fall of Cadia was a wound on the Imperium, but one that, if understood, could yet be healed. The ice-choked surface of Clarisus, a moon orbiting Khazar Holm, seemed no place for salvation. A barren, frozen wasteland, its silence echoed death. Yet here, amid shifting snowdrifts and opal glaciers, Belisarius Cawl's hopes found a lifeline. Behind him, the carcass of the Iron Revenant smouldered, a fallen Art Mechanicus that had made the ultimate sacrifice to shield the refugees fleeing Cadia. Cawl had lost his flagship, but not its prize. Hidden deep within its vaults lay the Armour of Fate, the final key to resurrecting humanity's greatest champion. They had come far, a millennia of effort, years of coalition across species, to reach this hour. Now, salvation took form in a flickering shimmer in the sky, the webway portal, crackling eldritch corridors that bypass reality itself. Through it stepped figures from legend, Yvain, emissary of the dying Eldar god Enid, and her Visage, guides through the paths unseen. Rounding their ranks were harlequins of the laughing god, weaving through shadows with dances of death. They answered not Cawl's logic, but his plight. Recognising the decayed scars of Cadia and the artefacts he carried, Yvain reached out, not for technology, but for purpose. In that meeting, alliances were forged, frail, ancient, but real. Humanity's saviours needed rebirth, and the Eldari saw the moment as their own. The webway tunnels, glowing violet with psychic currents, swept them across star systems until they touched down on Macragge, home of the Ultramarines. In orbit, the planet burned under the slashes of chaos fire, but the webway cut through the inflammation. They emerged in the shadow of the Fortress of Hera, where demonic corruption sizzled across the walls. Ultramarines drew weapons, uncertain. Among them, Chapter Master Calgar, the unflinching Sentinel of Ultramar, held his line. But Cawl brought him not threats, but proof. From his reliquary, he withdrew the armour of fate and the Emperor's sword, each humming with a purpose older than any creed. Guilliman's name broke through disbelief. 1,000 generations old, yes, but the armour, the blade, these were designed to fulfill a vow. Stewarded by Cawl, preserved through memory and machine. He spoke with suppressed calm. He had come to fix what had died. Inside the Temple of Correction, Guilliman lay in stasis, flesh broken and mind suspended. Demonic energies whispered through cracks. Cawl and Yvain entered in unison, machinery and mysticism weaving together in their hands. Cawl fitted the armour, its nanobond sealing wounds and fusing with bone. All the while, Yvain spoke with Anid's power, drawing upon souls of the dead and closing the rift in Guilliman's spirit. Within that fusion, technology and spirit merged. The armour pulsed, the sword sparked to life with holy flame. Guilliman shuddered, then breathed. Pale light filled the chamber. Where death should have reigned, life burned. He stood, Pyromarch of Ultramar reborn. Outside, the battle's tide turned. Demonic forces recoiled before human will, and Guilliman, wielding the Emperor's sword aloft, led a countercharge that shattered demons and banished despair. When the smoke cleared, Ultramar shone. Skies seemed brighter, and beneath storm-worn banners, new hope took root. Cawl, Yvain, Calgar, they stood together. Then Calgar, who had lost hope, now knelt before Guilliman, kneeling to the father he thought lost. The armour and blade were no longer relics, they were legacies. And Guilliman, he looked not like a relic risen, but a leader reborn. The weight on his shoulders remained immense, but in his hands lay vindication, renewed purpose for a galaxy on the brink. The alliance between Cawl and Yvain transcended race and creed. The Imperium clawed back from extinction. Cawl stepped back, fading into the cathedral shadows. His mission had found its pinnacle. Guilliman, fatherless heir to the Imperium's legacy, stood again, alive and ready to lead. In the dim, humming depths of Mars, beneath layers of billion-year-old crust and the relentless glow of forge-wall furnaces, the culmination of Belisarius Cawl's millennia of clandestine toil finally took form. Hidden in vast stasis vaults known only to him, legions of warriors lay asleep. Primaris Space Marines, genetically enhanced and meticulously perfected over 10,000 standard years. Each one stood taller, faster, stronger than any Astartes before him, their lethal physiques honed with an extra body organ, scour-resistant seed, and reflexes polished through cybernetic refinement. These warriors were not born of tradition, but out of innovation, and they were ready. The command came from Rabuti Guilliman himself, the returning Primarch and Lord Commander of the Imperium, whose rebirth had galvanised the splintered realm. In those early days after his resurrection, Guilliman turned to Cawl with a dire need. The Imperium teetered on the edge of extinction, beset by warp storms, demonic tide, and fracturing worlds. The old legions of Astartes, beloved though they were, had dwindled. They needed a new generation to rekindle Imperial arms and hope. Cawl agreed, and so began the Ultima founding, the creation of entirely new Space Marine companies forged from scratch, not lineage, chapters who nourished sapling was the Emperor's intent, but whose root was Cawl's genius. The unveiling was as dramatic as the builders had hoped. On board Cawl's massive Ark Mechanicus, the Tsar Quasitor, the ship's hold revealed rows of towering grey armoured warriors, Primaris Marines, shoulder to shoulder, silent in their permanence. Guilliman stood before them, flanked by High Lords and Mechanicus dignitaries, and declared to the galaxy, the Primaris are real and they are the Imperium's future. 36,000 awakenings flicked to life beneath Martian forges that day. Then, as the Great Rift rent the galaxy in two, Guilliman called the Odomitus Crusade. It was to be humanity's greatest response to chaos yet, a crusading armada to reclaim lost worlds, rebuild shattered bastions, and spread the light of the Imperium into places where dead had eclipsed faith. Leading the vanguard of this crusade were the newly awakened Primaris Astartes, armed with the Mark 10 Tacticus power armour, the Mark 2 Cawl pattern bolt rifles, repulsor tanks, Redemptor dreadnoughts, every edge a testament to the technology that had been forged in secrecy for millennia. The Indomitus Crusade surged outwards in waves of Lindane light, first towards the world's near terror, then across the warp-riven barriers into the Imperium Sanctus. Each planet that fell under schedule of annihilation was delivered salvation in the form of disciplined Primaris reinforcements. Entire chapters like New Glinting Guardians were born brand new, while others, dwindled by war, were bathed in genetic fire, receiving new battalions born not of ancestry, but of excellence. These Primaris made their mark on embryonic chapters, and their presence balanced the scales between extinction and recovery. The number of Primaris deployed was staggering. Thousands, then tens of thousands, carried across the galaxy's core like a living shield. Within the Crusade's dawning years, the term unnumbered suns emerged. Primaris drawn together not by chapter banner, but by purpose and proximity, modelled potentially after legacy legion lines or formed anew in orbit. Their numbers ebbed and flowed as they reinforced battles or seeded new chapters, yet their presence became a constant across systems consumed by war. Across the war-torn sectors, reactions varied. Many embraced them. After all, the Imperium's defenders needed every sword they could forge. Yet in the hidden corridors of Mars, skepticism simmered. The Adeptus Mechanicus whispered of hubris, of Cawl overstepping sacrosanct boundaries. Even if Guilliman himself commanded their work, in some quarters, the Primaris Marines were labelled as heresy, symbols of Martian break from dogma. But Guilliman's authority, a voice divine in the shattered Imperium, silenced much of the dissent outside the silent school thrones. Yet Cawl continued to push innovation as the Crusade rolled forward. He re-engineered the weapons and armour, refining with each wave of deployments. The Primaris Marines wielded not the relic kits of old, but new devices. Bolt rifles recalibrated, plasma incinerators refined, grav chassis revved. The war machines birthed under Cawl's guidance moved faster, attacked smarter, and endured more than ever before in Astartes history. No moment captured the new chapter's potency more than the final tides of the First Crusade phase. After securing monumental victories and reclaiming world after world, Guilliman gathered his forces for a triumph unlike any in Imperium memory. Chapters were dispersed to islands of rebellion, raiders or chaos, and Primaris-founded chapters took root, rising as blazing needles in darkness. The Imperium had regrouped, not just to survive, but to rebuild and endure. Through it all, Cawl receded once more into the Martian vaults. The once hidden commander re-emerged only when innovation called. But his legacy, primed through Primaris Marines, lived everywhere that Imperial soldiers stood renewed, and every fortress that held against warp and ruin. The Primaris, and their deployment in the Indomitus Crusade, proved that even in the face of annihilation, the Imperishable and the Imperium could survive. It was not a return to the past, but a forging of the future, and Cawl, through 10,000 years of heresy-tainted labour, had engineered the dawn. Mars stood as silent witness to the birth of heresy and heroism alike. Within its forges, lights flickered like stars trapped beneath red dust, and servo arms hummed hymns to the machine god. In this subterranean labyrinth, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl pursued a mission of transcendence, but not without cost. For centuries, indeed millennia, he laboured to engineer the future of humanity, yet every spark of progress ignited tensions buried deep within the Mechanicus. Amongst the robed and wired priests of the cult Mechanicus, his work stirred fear, and his audacity alarmed. Cawl himself had understood. Should he ascend as Fabricator General of Mars, he would provoke a silent schism, a civil war contained not in open battle, but in hushed accusations across sanctified vaults. Cawl's case seemed logical, even compelling. He had shepherded the resurrection of a Primarch, created an entire new generation of improved Space Marines, and rebuilt the Imperium's teeth. He had held back Chaos's tide when all else seemed lost, but logic was insufficient to bridge cosmic chasms in ideology. Many tech priests feared that such innovation, and one man wielding it so thoroughly, posed a blasphemy against the machine god's authority, especially when it meant bypassing ancient protocols. When rumours swirled that Cawl pressed Guilliman to grant him the Fabricator General mantle, most Mechanicus traditionalists recoiled. Guilliman, wise and wary, listened but did not yield. He recognised that reshaping the political hierarchy of Mars might spark outright rebellion, an internal conflict as dire as any external threat. The future of Mars, and Cawl himself, thus remained companioned by distrust. Meanwhile, whispers among the Mechanicus network spread like a virus through data sparks. Some considered Cawl a heretic in drag. He trafficked with Xenos technology, Necron pylons, Blackstone artefacts, even the dubious creation of Cawl Inferior, a digital personality. In Mechanicus terms, he had invoked several thousand counts of heresy by surpassing the Emperor's initial design. Purists condemned him. Radicals whispered prayers for his success. His name was alternately invoked as prophecy or warning. The Primaris Marines themselves served as equal parts symbol and embodiment of this tension. As Guilliman's instruments in the Indomitus Crusade, they were saviours to desperate worlds, but evidence of Cawl's radicalism. To some older Astartes, they were interlopers. To conservative Mechanicus scholars, they embodied blaspheme biology. Guilliman's authority filled the breach for now, but the embers of dissent glowed in Mars's data lattices. Amid this ideological quake, Cawl remained outwardly placid. He buried himself in innovation, not just for war, but for salvation. When general orders forbade certain re-engineering, he complied on paper while quietly advancing prototypes in hidden vaults. When questioned, he spoke not of ambition, but of duty. Innovation is not rebellion. It is the only bridge between extinction and renewal. Meanwhile, his mind continued its mutation. Subminds, discrete fragments of intellect, grew more numerous, operating labs and forging breakthroughs in isolation. One sub-Cawl might oversee a Scutari Legion's upgrade, another might calibrate a new Blackstone pylon array, yet another quietly scoured data vaults for lost STC elements. These fragments argued, negotiated and ideated, all within the confines of a single skull. Sometimes, Cawl admitted he was not even sure which submind held the answer he sought. Over time, he realised that the creation had outpaced control, but he refused to stop. Innovation was not just his purpose, it was his essence. This relentless march evolved into a silent war between preservation and progression, orthodoxy and survival. In clandestine forums, Mechanicus traditionalists composed mandates of restriction. In sub-basements, Cawl's allies distributed stealth scripts that preserved continuity of his work. The war was fought on data paths, not battlefields. More than once, Cawl ignited hidden conflicts. Ad hoc expedition teams weaved around planetary patrols, retrieving Blackstone shards hidden beneath ruins. Each clandestine triumph was a vote in favour of change, each whispered accusation a vote for inaction. Still, Cawl worked with tacit approval where it mattered most. Guilliman, trusting yet vigilant, granted science enough room to breathe, but kept a hand on the throttle when innovation might turn to obsession. This balance, trust tempered with restraint, defined their wary partnership. Guilliman had empowered Cawl with weapons of creation, but demanded that he not become the weapon himself. Meanwhile on Mars, factions formed. A cabal of vogue innovators met in hermetic sanctuaries. They shared Cawl's vision that stagnation was the true curse of the machine god. They reverenced the Meshmind as an evolution, not a threat. Others, purist and rigid, whispered of the precedent it set. If one man could innovate, why not many? Why not none? And thus the Mechanicus faced its quiet hour of truth. In the quiet hours of the forges, Cawl often lingered alone. His mechadendrites trembled with suppressed energy. His many eyes glowed under the cowled metal. And sometimes, he wondered whether the cost of salvation was too high. Was divided loyalty honourable if it birthed hope? Was transgression justifiable if purpose remained pure? But when data storms battered safe havens, when Primaris Marines held the thin line between lives and oblivion, Cawl's doubts receded. He had inherited a dying Imperium, and he'd give it a new sinew. He had betrayed tradition, but only to preserve civilization. The price of innovation might seem steep, and to some, it was unpayable, but he reckoned it worth every sovereign soul, every broken law, every hushed disagreement. In time, Mars would judge him, but for now, as the galaxy teetered, he chose creation over complacency. In that crucible, he held fast, building tomorrow's salvation in the shadow of today's fear. Mars had already become a silent sanctuary for forbidden breakthroughs, but when the Great Rift flared and the Imperium's hopes teetered, the threat came creeping not from the warp, but from within. Necron tomb worlds, stirred by the growing distortions of the Imperium, turned their chilling eyes towards Mars, and specifically the Blackstone deposits so tirelessly charted by Belisarius Cawl's great work. What followed was not war of armies, but a silent deadly campaign, the Blackstone War, fought in the shadows where human ingenuity met Xenos inevitability. The first signs were subtle, reports of mining crews disappearing, orbital scanners showing anomalies in restricted hexes, and cybervault recordings sifting to static when the Blackstone data was accessed. The Iron Hand of Mars revealed that Necron forces were reawakening in tomb complexes tied to mapped Blackstone veins. These were not random but precise reclamation missions, the Xenos thirst for the same resource Cawl intended to weaponise, not as cannon fodder but as stabilisers for quelling the rift. Cawl responded with silent urgency. He activated Legio Cybernetica detachments, repurposed night households, and Warforged retinues to reinforce vulnerable moons and minor forges. Scutari legions constructed perimeter defences, and elite teams of explorator techs armed with Cawl pattern detectors rushed to unguarded Blackstone sites. Each confrontation was a battle against invisibility, Necron dust storms, phase-shifted infantry, and impassive laws descending from stasis fractured the line between stealth and slaughter. In one strike, a convoy harvesting Blackstone on Gehenna, a once hallowed forge moon, collapsed under the sudden eruption of Necron warriors. Their metal forms phased through walls, swinging gorse blades with millennia of disciplined precision. Cawl's forces held, but only just. Extract pods launched into orbit with shards of black ore, their cargo more precious than life itself. The grip of the Necrons was tightening. Waging war against a disciplined horde, armed with technologies older than any standard template construct, demanded innovation, something Cawl excelled in. He retrofitted repulsor field generators into mobile Blackstone dampeners, crafting vanguard units that could suppress warp signatures long enough for extraction. He embedded resonance charges into Blackstone cores, capable of creating short shock waves that disrupted Necron phasing circuits long enough to stall pursuits. These were born not of doctrine, but pragmatism. On the strategic front, Cawl mobilised his digital incorporeal selves, subminds linked via warp-protected conduits, to coordinate theatres of response across multiple systems. One submind managed salvage and extraction logistics, another calculated warp host collapse probabilities, yet another ran threat analysis for tomb world emergence. Each operated independently, yet communicated with perfect synchronicity. This cognitive mess was not just command, it was war itself. Amid countless skirmishes, Cawl's greatest gambit unfolded in the system of Voltanax. There lay a vast Blackstone seam, essential to his pylon network. The Necron overran the surface before his forces arrived. Cawl deployed Blackstone resonance emitters embedded within Scutari exosuits and detonated them underground. The effect was not destruction, it was disruption. The resonance wave scrambled Necron phase logic, forcing them into status breakdown and buying precious tactical minutes. When the dust settled, humans stood at the crater's edge, breathing acid-scented air, watching black crystal shards glow eerily among broken servo skulls. Cawl's forces had succeeded. They had not healed the rift, but they had won a battle without flag or slur. Yet every innovation dragged him closer to the line he feared, playing with tools and artifacts so alien they could be his undoing. The Mechanicus Council began whispering again, sounding familiar refrains: heretic, xeno-tainted, cognitive contamination. Gilliman muttered that Cawl was the only man smart enough to save them, but also too smart to trust completely, so Mars' stewards readied failsafes just in case. At dawn, when the radiance of the industrial forges cut through the haze of war above Valator's crown, Cawl stood amidst the data slates and cogitators showing incoming threat vectors from tomb worlds. He allowed himself a brief pause. The Battle of Voltanax had yielded hundreds of tons of Blackstone, more than enough to fuel an early prototype of pylon satellite. He drafted assessments of extraction yield versus loss ratios. He benchmarked Necron phasic resilience. He plotted future extraction corridors with tactical precision. But his relief was tempered. He knew the war was far from over. Blackstone was finite. The ravening shadows still rose. Each victory painted him more into the broader narrative of treachery or salvation. Yet the greater risk, extinction, hovered above all. Therefore, as war raged on the fringes of company worlds and conspiracy simmered in the data chapters, Cawl pressed on. A victorious Blackstone convoy launched towards Terra, its cargo sealed in encrypted vaults aboard a modified Zarquasator. The data sparks of the Primarch's court flickered with grim affirmation. Innovation was not heresy, it was humanity's defence. Cawl's Blackstone War proved that threats from without could be met if commanders dared to think beyond dogma, and that salvation, when shaped under pressure, could take the form of both Firestorm and Blueprint. Gathering the sinuous protocols of his conclave Coronalis, where forge worlds like Akatran and Tigris had pledged covert resources after Cawl revealed the extent of Blackstone deposits and his designs for a network of temporal warp sealing pylons, Cawl assembled the mission. The world of Irtanathep existed in perpetual time dilation, seconds stretched into centuries. To infiltrate its depths meant warping his own frame of reference, living epochs while outside the scan remained the same. Yet he must succeed. The infiltration fleet made the impossible journey, through warp storms and Necron vacillation, to reach the world's orbit. Below, relic pylons still hummed faintly with arcane resonance buried within blackened obsidian halls. Cawl descended into the planet's catacombs with a vanguard of Scutari and servo constructs, his mind tethered across centuries even as his flesh moved with purpose. In the Temple of Coordinates, at the heart of the pylon network, he accessed the control nexus, a massive, monolithic focus of crystalline glyphs and ancient programming. This node, once a temporal governor for the pylon lattice, offered more than functionality, it offered proof. To reverse its resonance would not merely replicate the Cadian pylons, but potentially fracture the rift's geography. Necron Guardians stirred. Sentinels and Lichguard marched out of suspended corridors, their cold monolithic arms slicing through servo carapace and databanks alike. The tension between epochs and steel was almost sacred. Mechanicus against Necron, logic versus closure. Cawl activated anti-gravitic stoppers and resonance dampeners to buy time, while coordinating with subminds aboard the Zarquasator to hold data corridors open. Time itself resisted. Moments became collapsing corridors. The activation sequence dragged each second into lifetimes. As Cawl keyed the reverse signal, the pylons groaned into anti-warp resonance, emitting pulses of noctilith energy outward, tearing back the ambient tide of the Imperium in a widening loop of stabilising reality. Warp storms shrank in reply, as though remembering what normal might feel like. Then, fracturing, the node overloaded. The ancient machinery, overwhelmed by the recall of altered physics, began to implode. Stone, crystal and glyphs shattered under the force of energy unleashed. Extraction became impossible. Corridors collapsed, echoing with the groan of fallen ages. Cawl's servitors streamed back, dragging corrupted code slates into the wreck. The node was lost, but its output filed. When the dust settled, only the data remained. Cawl himself was trapped, but moments stretched again. His consciousness, slipping, triggered the failsafes. A comm burst flickered through. Proof succeeded, network viable, rift may be sealed. In the aftermath, forces rescued survivors and recovered data vaults, but Irtanathep collapsed into itself. No world, no node, only legend. Cawl's sacrifice had proven concept. His agents fled with the nexus schema, the mapping of warp suppression geometry, and the knowledge of how pylons might be replicated and networked again. Elsewhere, Gilliman received the transmission. The Primarch stared at the distortion reading. It wasn't control yet, but it was proof. He understood what it meant. Salvation lay not in faith, but in architecture, and there lived one mind who could draft the architecture blind. Cawl may have been broken or even buried beneath the collapsing world, but his legacy marched on. Subminds scattered through the Mechanicus network, archiving every shard of that moment, every spike of data. The great work had passed its critical test, not with tying destiny with ritual, but by bending reality to blueprints and Blackstone. This was no victory lap. This was the nudging creation's direction, the opening of a door long sealed. And beyond the rift, outside the world's death, Cawl's mind pulsed in archives and forges, preparing new nodes, new pylons, new hope. This transmission is concluded, the data seal is set, and the record of Belisarius Cawl's work is archived for the loyal. But the great work is not yet complete, and neither is our chronicle. More truths, more revelations await in the cycles to come. All adepts and citizens receiving this signal are commanded to maintain this channel's frequency. Strike the rune of subscription, activate the alert sigil, that you may return for the next sanctioned data burst without delay. Knowledge is the armour of the faithful. Do not meet the next broadcast unarmed. This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmission suspended. Stand by for the next awakening.